Hollywood didn't just miss the story, it buried it. No leaks, no confirmations, no denial. Ana de Armas and Tom Cruise were seen together. But what happened when the cameras disappeared shocked everyone around them. This wasn't a secret romance. It was something far more dangerous for their careers. And once you hear the truth, you'll understand why neither of them ever spoke about it. What if everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's most mysterious connection was only half the story? Behind the flashing cameras, red carpet smiles, and carefully worded headlines, there exists a quieter narrative, one that never found its way into the tabloids or trending hashtags. It's a story not driven by spectacle, but by silence. A story shaped not by public statements, but by what was deliberately left unsaid. When Ana de Armas and Tom Cruise were first linked together, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media lit up overnight. Fans, critics, and entertainment outlets rushed to fill in the gaps with speculation. Some believe it was a calculated Hollywood move, two stars aligning for visibility or future projects. Others leaned into the romance angle, convinced a secret relationship was unfolding behind closed doors. But as the noise grew louder, something unusual happened. Neither Ana nor Tom played along. There were no interviews addressing the rumors, no public confirmations, no dramatic denials. In an industry where attention is currency, their refusal to explain themselves became the most intriguing detail of all. The silence didn't calm the speculation, it fueled it. What many failed to notice was how carefully both stars navigated the situation. Ana de Armas, rising rapidly in Hollywood, had worked relentlessly to be recognized for her talent rather than her associations. Every role she chose, every appearance she made, was a step toward defining her own identity. Being reduced to a headline or a rumor threatened that hard-earned independence. Tom Cruise, meanwhile, was no stranger to public fascination. Decades in the spotlight had taught him a lesson few ever truly master. Not every story deserves a response. At a stage in his life where legacy mattered more than headlines, privacy became a form of control rather than avoidance. Their connection, whatever its nature, existed in a space rarely seen in Hollywood, a space of boundaries. This wasn't a fairy tale built for cameras. This wasn't a scandal crafted for clicks. It was two global stars navigating fame, friendship, and mutual respect while the world tried to define their story for them. What made their situation unique wasn't what happened between them, but how they handled what happened around them. Instead of feeding curiosity, they stepped back. Instead of shaping a narrative, they allowed the truth to remain personal. In doing so, they challenged the idea that every public figure owes the public an explanation, and that choice came at a cost. Silence is often misunderstood. To some, it signals guilt. To others, mystery. But in reality, it can be an act of self-preservation. For Ana and Tom, choosing not to speak was not about hiding something. It was about protecting something. In an age where oversharing is rewarded and privacy is questioned, their approach felt almost radical. It reminded audiences that behind every celebrity story are real people with real emotions, real boundaries, and real consequences. The untold truth, then, isn't about confirming a relationship or denying one. It's about understanding that not all connections fit into neat categories. Some are defined by respect rather than romance. Some are meaningful without being labeled. And some are powerful precisely because they remain private. In the end, this story isn't about what the world wanted to know. It's about what two individuals chose not to give. And that may be the most honest Hollywood story of all. Tom Cruise and Ana de Armas come from very different chapters of Hollywood history, shaped by different eras, expectations, and journeys of success. Yet, despite the gap in experience and legacy, their worlds briefly intersected at a time when both were searching for something beyond the surface of fame. Tom Cruise is not just a movie star. He is an institution. For more than 4 decades, his name has defined blockbuster cinema, global box office records, and almost unmatched level of consistency in Hollywood. From action franchises to dramatic roles, he has built a career on precision, discipline, and an intense commitment to his craft. At this stage of his life, Tom was no longer chasing visibility. He had already achieved it. What mattered more was intention, choosing projects that aligned with his values, and preserving a sense of privacy that had become increasingly rare. Ana de Armas, on the other hand, represents a new generation of Hollywood stardom. Her rise was not instant, nor was it easy. She began her career in international cinema, navigating language barriers, cultural shifts, and the challenge of being taken seriously in an industry that often categorizes talent too quickly. Through persistence and carefully chosen roles, she earned her place in Hollywood's brightest spotlight. Yet, with that recognition came pressure, the kind that tests identity and resilience. When their paths crossed, both were standing at personal crossroads. For Tom, it was a period of reflection. Having spent decades under constant public scrutiny, he had learned the importance of setting boundaries. Fame had taught him that not every moment needs to be shared, and not every story needs to be explained. Privacy, for him, had become a form of self-respect. For Ana, It was a moment of growth. She was learning how to navigate global attention without allowing it to reshape who she was. Success brought opportunity, but it also demanded strength. The strength to say no, to protect her voice, and define her own narrative. What initially brought them together was not romance or spectacle. It was something far less dramatic, yet far more meaningful: mutual respect. Their conversation centered on craft, discipline, and the unseen cost of stardom, the pressure, isolation, and constant expectations that exist behind the scenes. These were discussions that few outside their world could truly understand. Those who observed them closely noticed something rare in Hollywood. There was no performance, no exaggerated gestures meant for cameras, no attempt to create a story for public consumption. Instead, there was comfort, ease, a shared understanding that came from living under the same kind of spotlight for different reasons and at different times. There were no forced smiles and no dramatic displays, no carefully staged moments. Just two individuals communicating in the unspoken language of fame, a language built on experience rather than explanation. In an industry that often thrives on illusion, their connection stood out precisely because it lacked theatrics. It wasn't about being seen. It was about being understood. And in Hollywood, that kind of understanding is rare. This chapter of their story reminds us that not every connection between public figures needs a label or a narrative shaped by headlines. Sometimes, the most meaningful bonds are formed quietly, away from the noise, rooted in respect rather than attention. And perhaps that's why this moment continues to fascinate, because it challenged expectations, blurred assumptions, and showed that even in a world built on visibility, some connections are strongest when they remain unseen. Here's where the story gets interesting, not because of what was revealed, but because of what never was. Despite endless speculation, neither Armas nor Tom Cruise ever tried to sell a narrative. In an industry where public perception is often carefully managed, their response was strikingly different. They didn't confirm the rumors, and they didn't rush to deny them either. Instead, they chose silence. And that silence spoke louder than any headline, interview, or viral post ever could. The absence of explanation left room for imagination, and the public filled that space quickly. Stories were written, assumptions were made, motives were questioned. But behind the scenes, the reality was far more measured and intentional than the world assumed. According to those familiar with the situation, their connection was deeply personal, but not in the dramatic or romanticized way many expected. It was built on understanding rather than intensity, and on boundaries rather than impulse. Clear boundaries, ones that were respected without question. For Anna, this was especially important. She had fought hard to reach her position in Hollywood, overcoming language barriers, cultural transitions, and the constant pressure placed on emerging stars. She was determined that her work, not her associations, would define her. Being reduced to speculation or framed through someone else's legacy was a risk she was not willing to take. Her identity mattered. Her independence mattered. And she made that clear. What stands out is how that boundary was received. There was no pushback. No attempt to redirect the narrative for personal gain. Tom understood the weight of her position, perhaps better than anyone. Decades in the public, I had taught him the cost of losing control over one story. He knew that respect, not attention, was the foundation of any meaningful connection. Instead of control or pressure, there was understanding. Their private moments reflected that mindset. They weren't about luxury vacations, dramatic entrances, or Hollywood excess. There were no grand gestures meant to be seen or photographed. Instead, there was normalcy, a rare thing in their world. Simple coffee conversations, quiet walks away from cameras, discussions that had nothing to do with premieres, box office numbers, or public image. They talked about life beyond the screen, about balance, about what it means to exist as a person, not just a public figure. To outsiders, this restraint looked like secrecy. But in truth, it was something else entirely. This wasn't secrecy. It was protection. Protection of identity. Protection of peace. Protection of something that didn't belong to the public. In a culture that rewards overexposure, their choice felt almost defiant. It challenged the assumption that public figures owe the world access to every aspect of their lives. It reminded people that privacy is not a sign of guilt or deception. It's a form of self-preservation. Their silence was not a strategy. It was a boundary. And perhaps that's why this chapter of their story continues to spark curiosity. Not because of what happened, but because of how deliberately it was handled. In refusing to perform for spotlight, they reclaimed something rare in Hollywood: control. In the end, the most compelling part of their story isn't the rumor or the speculation. It's the restraint, the decision to let the world talk while they stayed grounded. The understanding that some connections don't need explanation to be real. Sometimes, the strongest statements are made without saying a word. The biggest mistake the world made was assuming that every connection in Hollywood must be romantic. In an industry built on spectacle, relationships are often simplified into familiar categories: love, scandal, betrayal. Because those stories are easy to consume. Anything that doesn't fit that pattern is quickly misunderstood. In reality, what Armas and Tom Cruise shared was something far rarer: emotional intelligence in a public world that thrives on drama. Their bond challenged expectations. It didn't rely on grand gestures or visible affection. There were no carefully staged moments designed to spark headlines. Instead, there was restraint, awareness, and a shared understanding of how easily perception can replace truth. And when something doesn't fit a familiar narrative, people don't sit with the uncertainty. They rewrite it. Speculation became the default explanation. Anna later hinted, in subtle ways, at how fame can distort reality. She spoke about how people project stories onto public figures, not out of malice, but out of desire. When audiences feel connected to someone's work, they often want access to their personal life as well. Creating a narrative helps them feel closer, even if that narrative isn't accurate. Tom understood this instinct better than most. Decades in the spotlight had taught him how quickly public curiosity turns into expectation. He had seen personal moments become headlines, and private decisions turn into public debates. He knew that once a story takes hold, it rarely belongs to the people living it anymore. That shared understanding shaped how they responded. Instead of feeding the rumors, they stepped back. No interviews to clarify. No statements to redirect the conversation. No attempts to control how the story was told. They chose distance, not from each other necessarily, but from the noise surrounding them. To the outside world, that distance looked like an ending, but it wasn't a breakup. It was a choice, a deliberate decision to protect peace over publicity. In a culture where visibility is often mistaken for relevance, stepping away can feel counterintuitive. Yet for Anna and Tom, distance became a form of clarity. It allowed them to exist without constant interpretation, without having to perform versions of themselves for public approval. This choice revealed something important about both of them. It showed a willingness to accept misunderstanding rather than sacrifice authenticity. It demonstrated maturity in an industry that often rewards impulsive reactions and oversharing. And it highlighted a truth rarely acknowledged in celebrity culture. Not every meaningful connection is meant to be witnessed. Their silence wasn't avoidance. It was intention. By refusing to explain themselves, they challenged the idea that public figures owe the world access to their private dynamics. They reminded audiences that relationships, whether professional, personal, or something between, don't require public validation to be real. In many ways, their decision became a quiet statement about boundaries, about knowing when to engage and when to withdraw, about choosing long-term well-being over short-term attention. And perhaps that's why this chapter continues to resonate. Not because it ended dramatically, but because it didn't. There was no explosive fallout, no public unraveling. Just two individuals making a conscious choice to step out of a story that no longer served them. In Hollywood, where every moment is often magnified, choosing peace is an act of courage. And sometimes, the most powerful narrative is the one that never gets rewritten, because it was never meant to be shared in the first place. Looking back, the untold truth about Ana de Armas and Tom Cruise isn't about whether they were together, or whether rumors of romance were accurate. That narrative, as tempting as it is for headlines, misses the point entirely. The real story lies in something subtler, yet far more profound. What they showed was that not every Hollywood story needs an ending the public demands. In an industry obsessed with drama, relationships are often packaged, labeled, and scrutinized relentlessly. The assumption is that every connection must be defined, validated, and made visible. But Ana and Tom defied that assumption. Their story existed on their own terms, independent of the constant gaze of cameras, tabloids, or social media speculation. Ana walked away stronger, more grounded, and more confident in her own voice. She had navigated a career filled with challenges, both personal and professional, and she knew the value of retaining her identity. For her, this experience reinforced the importance of self-respect and independence. She didn't need to justify her choices, nor allow public opinion to dictate how she moved through her life. In many ways, this period became a defining chapter in her personal growth, a testament to resilience and agency in an industry that often tries to diminish both. Tom continued his journey with the quiet dignity of someone who no longer feels the need to prove anything to the world. Decades in Hollywood had taught him lessons about fame, control, and the cost of public exposure. He had learned that validation from the internet, the press, or even fans is fleeting and ultimately superficial. Instead, he chose a path of quiet authority, living his life and making his decisions with care, discretion, and a focus on what truly matters to him. What they shared didn't need labels. It didn't need confirmation. And it certainly didn't need validation from the internet. In a culture that equates visibility with truth, this restraint is remarkable. It demonstrates a rare understanding that value and significance aren't always measured by public acknowledgement. Their bond, however fleeting or long-lasting, existed beyond gossip columns and trending hashtags. It was personal, intimate, and protected, not performative, not transactional, not for show. In a world obsessed with exposure, they chose privacy. In a culture hungry for drama, they chose respect. These choices speak volumes. While many would have capitalized on speculation, turning it into headlines or viral stories, they refused. They understood that their own sense of self, their integrity, and their well-being were far more important than any narrative constructed by outsiders. And maybe that's the most powerful story of all. Not romance, not scandal, not a public display of affection, but restraint. Choosing to value personal boundaries over validation. Choosing to honor their own pace, their own space, and their own dignity. Choosing to remain unseen when the world demanded to see. It is a lesson that extends far beyond Hollywood. In an era where lives are curated online and worth is measured in clicks, their example reminds us that privacy is not weakness, silence is not cowardice, and discretion is not shame. On the contrary, it is courage. Courage to define your own narrative, courage to preserve your own peace, and courage to exist on your own terms without the approval of others. Looking back, the untold truth is clear. This story was never about romance. It was about restraint. It was about self-respect. It was about choosing the meaningful over performative, the private over the public, and authenticity over spectacle. And in a world that constantly demands exposure, perhaps that choice, the quiet, deliberate act of valuing oneself, is the most profound love story of all.